Mhm. Welcome to our second night of classes, and the year is always interesting. I had a call just a little while ago that our speaker, the brakes went out on his vehicle, so he was unable to be here. I offered to go ahead and teach soils, but he still wanted to come back and do it next week. So I said, okay, I can teach roots. That'll be all right. So we're going to learn about orchard production. But before we get started, does anybody have any questions? Maybe things that you've been thinking about over the week that you didn't think to ask last week or anything? Yeah.
Is still water really better
Because it doesn't have the chlorine in it. I mean, you can take just bottles of water and leave them out for 20, 24, 48 hours, and that chlorine will dissipate. That's what most people do because distilled water, it can be kind of expensive to buy enough to water your plants with. Oh, okay. Well, it is. You're missing number 12. Oh, it should have been in there. They replaced them last year. I finally got it written last year because it was missing for several years. I have to see if I still have extra copies, and I will bring them to the next meeting. Um, so who else might need a chapter 12? Is she the only one missing it? You look in your book? Or did everybody probably just brought the soil section, didn't they? I apologize for that, but it was very last minute. Uh, I've got chapter 12 somewhere, so we'll get it to you. All right, so we're going to talk about orchard production, which is fruits and small fruits, mainly looking at the tree fruits tonight. Yeah. And so when somebody comes into the office and they tell me they want to put in an orchard and they want to grow this and they want to grow that, one of the first things I tell them, is that the site selection and soil preparation is two of your biggest things. I said, so don't plan on planting tomorrow. So when you come to me in my office, you're probably a year out on planting your fruits. Okay, because a lot of the times the soil needs to be amended, especially if you're growing blueberries and you need a low pH, things like that. You need to get your soil in the right place because these fruits are a permanent crop. Okay, like your fruit trees are going to be there, they're going to be put there permanently. And so we want to make sure that you select a good site, you do your soil testing, get your amendments into the soil, and then plant. Then you select your resistant varieties and all these things that we're going to go over tonight. So, kind of in a nutshell, but you want to think about, the success is only as good as the planning that you put into it ahead of time. Because, one of the things that makes extension agents cringe is when people come in and say, well, I just planted an acre of blueberries, and they're looking horrible. And you say, did you take a soil test? And they're like, no, why would I need a soil test? Or what's a soil test? Things like that. So I'd rather you come and talk to me before you put in a bunch of plants rather than after and you're having all kinds of trouble with them. So site selection and preparation. Don't take shortcuts. Don't take haphazard approaches to putting in an orchard because, like I said, it's a lifetime deal. You're going to be putting a lot of money and time, labor into it. And whether you're just doing it for a homeowner, maybe it's a small orchard, or maybe you're thinking about going into commercial orchard production. Okay, you want to have a diverse group of crops. You want to know those varieties that are going to be resistant to disease, and you're going to become familiar with the spray schedules, whether you're going with an organic spray schedule or a synthetic spray schedule. The climate here in Tennessee, it's very, very hard to grow fruits without spraying with something. And if any of you have ever just tried to grow a couple apple trees in your backyard, then yes, you've known the problems if you don't spray. So, okay. So plan ahead. It's easier to amend that site Put those soil amendments, fertilizer, lime or sulfur, whichever you need based on your pH. Whatever comes back on your soil test amendments or soil test results, should be able to amend the soil and do that before they get in the ground. You need to look at the slope exposure. And so when we think about the slopes, we want to keep these plants in dormancy as long as possible. Okay. So if you have a southeast facing slope or even a northeast facing slope, they're going to do better in that type of environment. Okay. Southwest is going to be really hot, especially in the latter part of the day. And then you're going to have heat stress and injuries during the summer months. But if you can, I mean, if you have the perfect window and you have a southeast facing site, that is going to be best on a slight hill, as long as your slope isn't too steep, because if you have a too steep of a slope, then you're going to have problems, maintaining and harvesting those fruits and things like that. So as it says, the southern facing slope is going to warm up faster in the spring, while the opposite is true of that northern slope. Eastern facing slopes are kind of intermediate. Your western facing slope tends to be windier. It will also be hotter. That wind can cause spraying problems, can cause drift onto other products that you don't, or other produce that you don't want to be spraying on, especially if it's herbicides. You're trying to control weeds in between your rows and things like that. You don't want that drifting off to your vegetable crops or even drifting back up onto your fruit trees and causing damage. So the ideal site is about a 4 to 8% slope. It can be difficult to operate machinery on slopes of more than about 10% because that gets pretty steep. So, but we have to take what we have in our mind as the idea environment and kind of work with what we've got. So selecting a site for an orchard also involves below ground considerations, primarily the soil depth and the soil texture. You want a site with good soil drainage. You don't want it to be real rocky. But here in Tennessee, we tend to have those, rocky, churty type soils. And so we'll just have to choose those varieties that will grow well here in our Tennessee climates. So, but soil drainage is going to be important because they do not like wet roots. They don't like to sit, where it stays wet and holds water. So, stone fruits are the most susceptible to poor drainage. They have a lot of root rot issues, and they also have insects, boring insects that will get in there if the tree gets stressed and those roots are staying wet constantly. You get insects and diseases that come in on them. So apples are kind of intermediate, and pears can survive on the more poorly drained soils. They can take a little bit more water standing. But you don't want a low area that stays wet continually, basically. So when you're soil testing, you may want to have the organic matter, the percentage of organic matter tested in your soil. I forget how much that costs. It's an extra charge. It's like an extra $5 or $10 on top of the regular soil test. And so you might want to see how much organic matter you got in your soil. I mean, usually you can tell this by looking at it. I mean, if everybody's familiar with the soil profile, when you first dig down into the soil, your top couple inches should be, organic matter. That's your topsoil. And then you go into your levels A, B, C, those are your subsoils. And so if you're maybe just planting a few fruit trees in your backyard and you're in a new construction area, you're left with subsoil. And so you're going to have to do some work on those beds, rip the areas, and we'll talk about that and see some pictures, but maybe even rip deep down into the soil to break up hard pans, add compost, add sawdust, things like that, that are going to help to amend and break down in that soil. And so your organic matter, it consists of those dead and decomposing, even animal parts. We don't want that in our compost, but it could be just naturally in the soil if you have a dead animal. But the living organisms are going to break down plant debris into organic matter. You have the microorganisms that live in the soil. that are working for us. And so they feed on that organic matter, they break it down, and they build up the structure of the soil, making a happy place for the roots to grow. So you want about a good 6 to 8 inches of good soil with good till to it. Okay. You may want to consult a county soil map, especially if you are going into commercial orchard production. A soil map, we used to have our soil survey maps. They used to be paper books, and they were really hard to determine where your location was. We learned how to use them in college, but that's been a long time ago since college. And now they've come out with this USDA web soil survey map online, which is, there's a little learning curve to it too, but it's got a good instruction manual. It tells you how to do the various things, and you just got to play with it a little bit. But essentially, once you put your address in, you pull up the site and you start a new web soil survey. You put your address in, and it zooms in on a spot that is your address. And then it's kind of up to you to remember where your property lines are, because you can see the boundaries. But then you've got to take, if you're familiar with GIS or ArcGIS, things like that, you've got to make a little triangle or shape around your property. Okay, and then you click on that and you click on the soils map, and it brings up another frame and it tells you exactly what type of soil you have, how much it varies from, here to here to here, and also tells you whether it's prime farmland, what is good to grow there, what is the depth to your water table. I mean, is it going to be a Churty loam, or is it a Guthrie silt loam? It will tell you all this information that you need, and then you can do a little bit more research. But it does, it gives you an excellent map and will help you determine what to grow where. It will tell you if you're in an area that holds water or floods frequently, is dry, things, all that information that you need to know about that parent soil, because parent soil is always going to remain the same. You can add new soil, you can add organic matter, but we have a limestone base, and so that's always going to be a limestone base unless you're over a pocket of sulfur. So, and there can be one pocket of soil right next to the other that can look a little different. So have you ever planted 2 trees in your yard, just one over here and one over here, and this one grows huge and this one's over here just looking piddly and puny? That's how close, the difference in the soils can be. It just changes. And we also, another thing that I found is we have a lot of karst soils across Tennessee, which means we have a cave system underneath. So Clarksville's full of caves, sinkholes, things like that. And so sometimes you just don't have the soil. You don't have that soil depth. You're going to have, it may open up into a hard pan. You may have a cave, something like that, that's going to, that you're dealing with underground. So, but this USDA web soil survey has been very beneficial. It's helped me to help farmers, put their farm plans together. Check this. Okay. Uh-oh. Uh-oh. Can you hear now, Judith? Sorry.
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay. Okay. All right. Good. Okay. So pH and fertility are considered important factors for orchard soils. But the trick is you really don't need a highly fertile soil to grow fruit. You want to keep them a little bit on the hungry side so that they do keep producing fruit every year. So if you have a highly fertile soil, you may have more problems with diseases, especially, because they'll take in that nitrogen, they make a lot of lush foliage, and then the diseases come along in the right conditions for those diseases. And so you have leaf spot fungus and brown patch and apple blotch and different things like that. So you don't have to have, a really fertile soil. It can be medium to low fertility levels, and they'll still grow fine. Soil pH is the one thing that you do need to make sure that you have corrected and in the right range. And so if Hebron was here tonight, he'd be talking about the soil pH. Basically, 7 is neutral. Anything above 7 is going to be alkaline, or they call it sweet. And anything below 7 gets you into the acidic zone. So most of your fruits and vegetables will like a pH of about 6.0 to 6.5. Now, if you get into blueberries, azaleas, rhododendrons, they like more acidic soil. Around 4.8 to 5.5 is what you're going to aim for. So, and you cannot tell that just by looking at the soil. And if you just pick up a cheap soil kit at one of the garden centers, those are not going to be really accurate, and they're not going to give you the recommendations on how much lime to put down or how much fertilizer to put down. So I recommend our university, our UT Labs in Nashville. It costs $25 to send in your soil to get it tested, and they come back with the exact recommendations that you need. I mean, it's written in layman's terms, tells you exactly what you need to do. Okay? And Hebron will be here next week, so he'll go over all the details on the soil testing and such. Did you have a question? True. Mm-hmm. Yes, it tends to be.
Yeah.
Right. Right. And that's why they, I mean, with USDA web soil surveys, they try to keep those updated. And it's still important to know what is below the soil, what has not been disturbed, what is still left there, because you're going to have to work with that, even though they've brought soil in and you've added organic matter. You know, that limestone is still going to be breaking down slowly over time and will make your soil more alkaline. So things like that, they still are pertinent. A lot of that information is pertinent. Okay. All right. Soil fertility can be corrected by applying that fertilizer according to your soil test results, and also the different ways that you can increase levels of organic matter. We're going to talk about that during our presentation. Soil factor, usually not a limiting factor unless the soil is highly acidic and you have to add a lot of lime. And if it is really acidic, then there'll be recommendations for you to put down like 1,000 pounds of acre, 1,000 pounds per acre in the spring, wait 6 months, and then do another application, soil test again, see where you're at, because you have to have time for that lime to make a chemical reaction in the soil. Or if you're bringing this pH down, then it'd be a sulfur type product. It's going to take time for that reaction to happen and that change, and it's a permanent change that you're looking for. So sometimes you need to get down to that plow layer depth. Okay, if your farm, your home is located on where a commercial farm has been for years and it's been plowed, you may have that plow layer, and it's kind of like a hard pan. And so sometimes you just have to do some correcting right at the beginning, to rip that soil and get it opened up to where you don't have that limitation there. And as I said, the fruit orchards don't necessarily need a high fertility, high fertile soil. Mm-hmm. Right. We're gonna talk about that next week. I'm not gonna take all of Hebron's stuff away from him. So that was what we were supposed to go over tonight. But like I said, he had car trouble. So we're gonna go over a little bit on soil testing too, but he is gonna reinforce that next week. But yes, you're right. Yes. Yes. Yep. 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 We'll go over that here in just a few minutes. Okay, so the best soil is going to be a well-drained loam, about 3 to 4 foot deep. And we don't necessarily have that in Tennessee. You don't find that. You find that down in the now lower Missouri, the Boot Hill, where they have the good alluvial soils, next to the Mississippi River, things like that. Here, we're not necessarily going to have 3 to 4 feet of good soil. And good drainage should take preference over, the depth. Because we know the roots of the tree are going to make their way down through the soil eventually. They got to be tough. They got to fight their way down there. So, soil fertility should be medium to low. Those overly fertile soils can lead to excessive growth and increase your disease problems, and that will cause your fruit production to go down when you have a lot of disease problems. And as I mentioned, the pH is around 6.0 to 6.5 is the best range for your fruit trees, and anything higher or lower than that can cause nutrient deficiencies. So once you have selected a site, you must prepare it. Sometimes you may buy a property that has an existing orchard. Maybe a stone fruit orchard, which would be peaches or plums. We don't grow apricots, plum cots in Tennessee. We just don't recommend them. They do not do well in Tennessee. Okay. But it is important, if you've had stone fruits in an orchard area, to take a nematode test. I know that's an extra step, but if you've got nematodes in your soil, that's another thing you want to get under control before you plant any new trees, especially because those nematodes will feed on the roots of the plant, and then the plant will just kind of, get a little unhealthier each year as those nematodes are feeding on it, because they're taking out that sugar energy and everything that the plant needs to grow. So if it's an old orchard, existing orchard, take a nematode test along with your soil test to see if you need fumigation. Now, there are different ways of fumigation. There are soil solarization. There are organic chemicals that are available now to fumigate the soil, and that gets rid of most of your pathogens. And for soil-borne diseases is really what you're looking at there. Okay, now taking a soil test to check for your fertility. Our lab, the University of Tennessee lab, is in Nashville. And so you're welcome to come by and get boxes and stuff, the sheets, and take it to the post office yourself. But basically, it's going to cost you $10 to mail it, and the soil test itself costs $15 now. So total of $25. That's what it costs us to, mail it off and everything. So you get your samples together, and then go over that, and then bring it into us, and we can either send it in, or you can just take it to the post office yourself if you would rather, or you could take it up to the lab.
Small sample like the co-op.
You can take the soils to co-op, but they do not use our lab. They use a commercial lab out of Memphis, and we have seen a lot of discrepancies between the recommendations on fertilizer that come from the co-op test versus our lab test. So if you want somebody that's in between, we're neutral. Okay, we're just trying to get you to grow the best crop as possible. We're not selling you fertilizer. So go to one of the UT labs or Kentucky lab, use somebody kind of in that neutral range. But as he was saying, when you take a soil test, basically you're going to start out with a bucket and a shovel, or if you've got a soil probe, you can use that. I found that soil probes in Tennessee are virtually useless. Even if the soil is a little bit soft, then you've got mud, and then you've got to get that probe, you got to get a stick, get in there and try to get that piece of soil out of the soil probe. So I like just taking like a spade and a bucket, and I'll just pick an area to start. Dig down 6 inches, gather a little bit of soil at that level, put it in your bucket. Now, if you're establishing a commercial fruit orchard, and if you want to do this as a homeowner, you can, but it's especially important if you're going into business. You want to take 2 samples. You'll take one from a 6 to 8 inch depth, and then you'll take another one from about a 12 to 14 inch depth. So you may need somebody to come in with soil ripper or till it up so that you can get down to that 14 inches. Because sometimes there will be a difference between what your pH is up here and what your pH is down here. So what you do is you send in those two samples and then you kind of average it out. And you also talk to the lab about what you're wanting to do, what you're planting, and they know that you're planting a fruit orchard, and then they'll come back and tell you what the recommendations are for both. So, but is that what you were talking about, subsampling? So that's just in fruit trees and permanent, permanent crops like that. So, but as I said, Hebron will go over all of that. That's just a simple summary of how you would do your soil test, but it is a little bit different for fruit trees. You want to examine and identify the perennial weeds that before working the ground, and then decide whether, how are you going to control those weeds? Are you going to solarize by laying out clear plastic? You have to lay down clear plastic during the hottest part of the year, which puts that field out of production. But excuse me, but that's okay if you're getting ready, if you're during the summer and you're getting ready for a spring planting, early winter, late spring planting the next year, that'd be fine. You keep that, you solarize the soil for a certain amount of weeks, usually takes a couple to 3 months, and the soil has to get up to a certain temperature to kill the pathogens, the weeds and the weed seeds and things like that. So you can use soil solarization, clear plastic. It's got to be put down flat to the ground, and you've got to use like sandbags or something like that to keep it and make sure there's no drafts going underneath, because you want that heat to build up. And one question I usually get asked is, where do all the worms go? Well, when it gets hot, the worms go down to where it's cool. So a lot of times your insects will just go down below the layer, but you're really wanting to get rid of the pathogens in the soil if you can with solarization. It's getting rid of a lot of them. A lot of them will move down beyond, that it's going to warm up about a 6 to 8 inch depth. When you solarize, it's going to get hot that deep. And so some of them will go deeper than that. You might lose a few, but then they'll come back, because your soil is going to be healthier in the long run. So they'll come back and they'll start working again. So the other way you can do it, is use a product, a non-selective herbicide that will kill everything. And you start in with that. You spray, you give it about 14 days to see if it's killed everything. And if you still see green stuff out there, you go hit it again and wait about another 2 weeks to see if everything's good and dead. And then you can lightly till up the area. You can maybe do strip tilling. Your fruit crop's going to be in rows. Okay, so you could just do a long row and amend that with compost, put your lime and all that stuff down. That would probably be the easiest way to go, or you could till up the whole darn field if you wanted to. Okay, it might save you a little bit of work if you just do, the strip tilling where you're going to plant, put the amendments down where you're going to plant. Does that make sense? And then you're going to have some type of a ryegrass or a wheat or something in between the rows for cover. So that's where our cover crops come in. You'll have a permanent cover crop in between the rows. Yes, it will kill with weed seeds. Yes, it has to get up to 180 degrees under there. And so usually you have a thermometer set somewhere. It's be underneath the plastic. So when it gets condensation, you'll have to know where it is. So you can kind of, be able to see the temperature. The clear works better. Clear seems to work better. Have you ever had something like, I don't know, one time we had roofer, and we were going with a metal roof, and they left the metal roofing laying on my yard for several days, and it fried the grass. Yeah, I was mad as all get out. And then, but a couple weeks later, that grass was growing again, and I knew it would. It just made me mad that they laid out all that, so it looked like it killed it, but it didn't. And so there's something different between the colored and the clear plastic. So, yes.
On our
and
Mhm.
clear all of the stuff and seed. I always think of our greenhouse, like it's clear,
Mhm.
and then we want it to be cooler, we have
Yeah.
black shade.
Sure, sure. So, yep.
This work during the winter? Or we have to-
No, you need the heat.
Yeah,
You need the heat, so it kills off everything. Yep. So, non-chemical controls are going to include tillage, planting cover crops that build up the soil structure, and then tilling those cover crops in or crimping them. And you want to keep that soil covered with some type of vegetation so that sunlight does not reach with the weed seeds that are basically you have a weed seed bank underneath the ground. Okay, seeds you probably haven't seen in years. You go and till them, and they'll come back up. You know, like amaranth is a really bad pigweed. The amaranths are really bad for being way down in the soil, and they'll just stay dormant. But once they have sunshine and a little bit of water get to them, boom, they come up. So even after you've planted, you want to continue with those cover crops and maybe some type of a plastic culture system. You can put fruit trees on weed barrier fabric as long as you've got the irrigation underneath. It won't last the lifetime of your trees. Just think of that, but it will last long enough to get those trees established. And that way you have irrigation and you have weed control there, and then you're just mowing in your middles. Okay. So, but again, running a deep shank across the field in two directions will help to break up any existing hard pans that you might have. And that, you're just going to learn from the history what has your land been used for in the past. You just got to know that information. Okay, our cover crops have a lot of benefits to them. If you're using them as a live manure crop, that is a cover crop that you plant, and then you're going to kill it off and till it in. One of the worst things that I hate, and USDA and RCS will recommend this when you're cover cropping, is to spray with a herbicide to kill off that cover crop. Well, I'm thinking if you're thinking soil health, why in the world would you spray a pesticide on it when there's different ways? I mean, you can mow it down. They have roller crimpers. If you just have a small area, you can use like a 55-gallon drum full of water or halfway full of water and just roll it over those areas to knock down those weeds. But a fall cover crop is going to be planted, by October 15th. You want to get it out before October 15th, or we go into where that first frost comes along and it will kill it, kill those young plants as they're coming up. But some of our recommended plants would be like crimson clover, annual rye, barley, mustard greens, radishes. I also include oats and wheat because, again, you're growing your own mulch. So rather than having to go out and buy straw to put in between your rows, you're just kind of rolling over them with something or mowing it down, and that creates your mulch. And then the microbes love it, and they'll help break it down and decompose it. And then you might come in with a summer cover crop in between the rows, and that will also keep it covered all the way, and it breaks down and adds nutrients a little bit over time.
So I'm doing raised beds on chocolate off tape. We're gonna put cover crop on top.
Okay, repeat. I'm sorry.
Okay, I'm doing raised beds.
Doing raised beds. Okay.
I'm just a chop of the leaves, grass, I built the raised beds in the fall.
Mhm.
I put cover crops on top.
It's got leaves and stuff on it right now.
Yeah. Well,
You probably want to turn it to where you're making good seed to soil contact would be the only thing, but
Okay.
yes. Yeah, I wouldn't put it on the leaves. I would turn that over.
right. Well, usually I chop the leaves with a lawnmower, so it's
Okay.
really fine. And usually
Okay.
I just fill the raised beds, grass.
Yeah,
Chop it.
yeah, I would probably turn all that, use a broad fork or something like that to turn it over, and then put your cover crop seed on top of that. And then it's going to grow all winter long. And some of it will be killed back by our first frost, but like the daikon radishes, once they're killed back by the first freeze, they could decompose in the soil. And I mean, it's really neat to kind of watch it. They are stinky though, so the radishes do stink as they break down. But that's the smell of compost. That's the smell of the microbes working, I think. Um,
Your in winter area
mhm,
would be dry.
mhm.
Those are the-
Yes. Yeah. We usually just honestly would cut them down and leave the remains on top of the ground just to kind of break down. Yeah, if I have a garden, I do it a little bit different. So if I have a garden area, I'm going to till that in or turn it over. I don't like to use a tiller. Maybe one time a year, like if I'm doing a vegetable garden, I will till it up, and then from there on, the tiller does not go back into the garden. Okay, because I'm trying to work with those cover crops. I might do some strip tilling where I want to plant my row of tomatoes or I want to plant my broccoli. I will strip till that and maybe hand remove some of those cover crops, but just let them lay in between the rows and just flatten them down. And so, or you can just leave them up, like the crimson clover and things like that. They're flowering. They're going to be bringing in native pollinators, and that's good for our gardens. And that's definitely needed for our fruit trees because the fruit trees are insect pollinated. They're not pollinated by wind. They've got to have an insect go from one flower to the next, spreading that pollen from plant to plant and flower to flower. So, but if you think about a spring cover crop, once these are done and you've rolled them out or you've crimped them out, I think buckwheat is one of my favorite ones. It reseeds readily. There's even a pink and a red variety, which is really pretty. And it's just one of my favorite plants besides sunflowers. But the buckwheat does add some phosphorus into your soil as it breaks down. And what I do is I go through like right now the seeds, it's gone to seed, and so I just go through and I pick the seeds off and I just scatter them around, and then they come back up, and that will be a continual process until we get our first hard freeze, and then buckwheat will not grow anymore. So when the plants get about 2 foot tall and they're finished flowering, you just pull the seeds off, or you can mow it down and let it reseed and come back up, and then decide whether you're going to till that in or how you want to work with it. So like I said, the time to put down a fall cover crop, mid-August, late September, you definitely want to try to beat that October 15th deadline because we're going to get a frost pretty soon. When you're getting to October 15th, you're really pushing it because you got to think if you plant on October 15th, it's still going to take about 14 days for things to germinate. So that puts us to the end of October, going into the first part of November, and we're bound to get a freeze sometime during there. And if your plants are still small and they haven't toughened up, that freeze is going to kill them off, and then you've lost a lot of money and seed. So okay, so there is some of our crimson red clover. You can see that's growing in between grapes. They don't really have to mow. At this point, they may be doing a little bit of spraying, but they can drive right over that and it'll usually just pop right back up. But I mean, just one of the best pollinator plants that are out there. And you always want to have a legume. You want to have a pigeon pea or, some type of winter bean or winter pea to put out with your cover crop in the winter too. But you can do that during the summer also. But the legumes add nitrogen to the soil. That's why you want to have a legume in the mix. Okay. Now here's one that's probably been killed off with a herbicide, and the debris is just sitting on tops waiting to be tilled in. Like I said, you can do this, or you could just crimp it down. But you want to plow down, try to till in any stubble that's in the ground, and incorporate any organic matter. Again, you're going to be soil testing at this time, incorporating any needed amendments according to your soil test recommendations. But doesn't that soil look pretty good? I thought it looked pretty good. It's not red clay anyway. All right, any questions about soil preparation or the soil testing part for fruits?
Why do they put roses in fruits?
Why do they put roses at the end of grapevine or in the rose? They are an indicator plant for diseases and nutrient problems. They have similar requirements. They have similar insects. So they're kind of what you call an indicator plant. When their rose does not look good at the end of the row, then they're going to check that row of grapes and see what might be going on. Soil test from that particular area. So yeah, it's an indicator plant. Okay, so most of your fruit trees, nut trees, grapevines, they are purchased as bare root plants, and they're normally planted in late winter, early spring. So we're thinking January, February, March. You definitely want to have them out before the end of April. And so this goes back now to what I was saying at the beginning. You know, if you're thinking about growing fruits and you're just now starting to think about it, you're probably not going to have enough time to get your soil prepared to put them out, you know, this January or February. You're a year out, okay? You're going to be cover cropping, you're going to put soil amendments, you're retesting the soil, all these things. So you got to give it a little bit of time and planning before you put your plants out there. So again, the plants are best if you purchase them bare root. The smaller, the better. Our box stores will sell you these huge out of shape fruit trees, and they're usually full of diseases. They haven't been taken care of, and they have not been pruned properly. And you really want to start out with a small tree so that you can start your pruning early on in that plant's life, and you prune it the way that you want it to be, and according to our guidelines that we're going to show you. Okay, so but bare root plants are going to adapt a lot faster than a larger tree. They're going to grow a little bit faster, but you're still not going to get a really, you know, their first fruiting year will probably be the 3rd to the 5th year. Okay, because you have to defruit the plants the first 3 years. Don't let them make any fruit the first 3 years. Okay, and then the 4th and 5th year, you're going to start letting them produce. And like I said, that 5th year should be your good harvest year, your first really good harvest. And then if you're taking care of them and you've done everything right, from there on, you're in maintenance mode, maintenance and harvest, maintenance and harvest. So you can't just throw them out there and walk away. So again, the bare root plants might be a little bit less expensive. Depends on what varieties you're wanting and where you go to get them and things like that. But you do want to work with a reputable plant dealer. You'd like to buy plants that are grown in the same zone that you're living in if you can. And here in Tennessee, we're lucky to have McMinnville not too far away. So there are a lot of fruit growers in the McMinnville area. We also deal with North Carolina, South Carolina, Virginia. A lot of the growers up there are in a similar growing zone and grow crops that will grow in our zone. And I can post those on the Google Drive. I did not get them up because it was a surprise that I'm teaching tonight. So, but I will get all that information together and get that on the Google Drive for you. So you'll have those resources also. Born and raised here. Mm-hmm. Right. Right. I think in a nutshell, but yes. 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 Right. So a lot of our nurseries that our big box stores purchase their plants from are, well, you might do Florida, Georgia, or we'll go the other extreme and we'll go up north. And those plants are used, you know, they're used to cold winters there, and then they can't handle our hot summers here. So yeah. Yeah, Michigan and things like that. It's not as good to purchase, you know. They're going to have a little bit of adaptation time. because, you know, they're plucked out of the field, they're shipped down here, and then they're put in your landscape and they say, ha, what'd you do with me? You put me in Tennessee. No, take me back to Michigan. Yeah, they go into shock.
I think the Stark Brothers in Missouri.
Yeah, they're Stark Brothers in Missouri. Now that's one of the best places that you can get fruit trees from those.
That's where I buy them. Sometimes in Auburn,
Mm-hmm.
so.
Audubon Society.
What's the closest?
Um, I would have to be McMinnville, either McMinnville or North Carolina. The Starks Nursery. Trying to think, about 6 hours away. Yeah, it's like I said, it's in Missouri. So. Okay, again, on your plant selection for your apple trees and pears, you're going to consider selecting trees that are small. They're going to be whips, which are 1 to 2 years old when you purchase them. And they'll probably be about 4 to 6 foot tall and 3/8 to 5/8 inch caliper. And that is how big around the plant is at the base. Okay. Now, some of you, I know some of our master gardeners, when it came to we showed how to measure a tree. Okay, so we measured DBH. It's at what? How high do you measure DBH? You guys remember? What's DBH stand for? No? Okay, when you're looking at measuring trees, the diameter at breast height, or you calculate the circumference of a tree, like if we're doing a large tree, like our champion tree contest. So you measure it, diameter at breast height, and you take the inches divided by pi, and that gives you the circumference of the tree, okay? The caliper is a little bit different because they think of it in nursery terms, and that is the base before the flare comes out on the tree. That is your caliper. So that's just really nursery terms, landscape nursery terms, but it's something good to know the difference. That, you know, if you're out measuring a big tree, you're not measuring the caliper, you're measuring the diameter, the DBH. So anyway, you want the small trees. You don't want them to have any side branches. So you're going to remove those, as we'll see here in a minute. Stone fruits, your peaches, peaches and plums, that's really the only stone fruits we can grow well here. And they're still, you've got to pick the right variety of peach trees for them to do well.
Earlier you said peaches don't.
No, it's apricots. We don't recommend apricots and plum cots. Peaches are a big challenge in Tennessee. You can grow them.
Bloom.
They tend to bloom too early. Yes. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah, that's true. About once every 10 years or once every 7 years, you'll actually, yeah, yeah. And so if we have one of those crazy freezes like we did last December, you know, that took out, did a lot of damage to trees early on. And then the ones that did go ahead and bloom out, here comes, I think we had April and, was it March and April, or April and May? You know, we had 20-degree temperatures. So that took out the rest of the blooms that weren't killed by the deep freeze in December. So this has been a bad fruit tree year. Apples seem to have done pretty good. Pears have done good. Peach crop was pretty much wiped out in this area. Even into Georgia, there were some shortages on the peach trees. So if you bought from the peach truck, you'll probably, you know, realize that your prices almost doubled. Yeah.
Very good point. If you're not just trees, you're doing an orchard, don't have all the same variety that blooms all at the same time.
Yeah.
That way you can avoid one freeze and still get
Right.
through.
Right, that is true. You want to get the ones that bloom at different times to extend your harvesting season. So I will upload those. They change every day, it seems like. They're constantly doing research, and about the time that we're ready to recommend a variety that does good in a research setting, they find out that, well, in the landscape setting, it doesn't do so well. You know, kind of like the Honeycrisp apple. everybody has gone nuts. Has everybody had Honeycrisp apples from the grocery store? Okay, they're wonderful. They're juicy. They're crisp. They're sweet, kind of a little bit sour. But have you ever bought them and they got this brown rot right in the middle of them? About every bag that I buy has bitter rot. And that's one of the storage issues with the Honeycrisp is they realize after they put it into commercial production, because you have to chill them right after you pick them, you got to chill them immediately to get them ready for storage. And so between the chilling and some other things going on, they get bitter rot, which makes them not store so well. So they look fine on the outside, but then you go to bite into the apple and you got that on the inside, and it's bitter rot. And so, like I said, that's a variety that did very good. Hand picking, a U-pick operation would be fine. But if you have a commercial, a large nursery where you're having to put them in storage and wait to sell them, they're going to sit in that storage shed, then they're going to go to the store. They don't store well. So they thought they were a really good apple variety, and then boom. It's kind of like the knockout roses. We thought they were really good, and then boom, something gets them. They're resistant, not immune. So.
I have a neighbor that kind, I don't know what kind they were, but it's kind of street, and then she was told that someone within a 10-mile radius of the apples.
Cedar.
Oh,
Cedar.
so
Well, it won't necessarily kill the trees. That's cedar apple rust, and we're gonna look at that here in just a little while.
We have to buy the consistent varieties, none of the box stores.
No.
Variety.
what is in Kentucky?
They buy the
Yeah.
ones they buy at the store, like Whole Foods.
Yeah. Yeah.
Don't buy.
Yeah.
Only get things that are
Yeah, and I will.
better.
Enterprise and Liberty are two pretty good
Yield.
new releases.
Liberties.
Yeah. Liberty gets fire blight really bad. I found out after I planted those, but yeah, I will put those up on the internet, our current recommendations. Excuse me. So anyway, so your stone fruits, we'll look at how to train those. But basically you want to get your trees, about 4 to 6 foot tall, and just a skinny little tree. That's all it's going to be. It's going to be a little whip when you plant it, and it's going to be bare root. Most let's see, most of them will be 1-year-old field grown plants. Okay. All of your fruit, nut, and grapes are grafted. Okay, so you have a certain type of a rootstock, and the scion is the top part that's your desirable fruit. That scion is grafted onto the rootstock, and the rootstock has will be like have an immunity to or be able to withstand drought or withstand root rot diseases or be resistant to the root collar borer and things like that. So the rootstock is grown for one reason, to help establish in the soil, and then the top part is your desired plant, like your Liberty apple or your Contender peach. Okay, so if if you take a apple or peach, whatever, and plant that seed, are you getting the same variety? No.
No.
Nope.
You
Nope.
get lucky.
If you're lucky, you may get something close. Okay, y'all remember the Punnett square back in botany? You remember, think way back, you had the Punnett square where you put all this in there, or they did it in physical science too, where they talked about the eye color of the parents. You have a blue-eyed and a brown-eyed, a green-eyed, and then you have all that mixes together, and you have so many chances of getting a green-eyed child or a blue-eyed child or a green blue-eyed child. Same goes with flower color, same goes with fruit, things like that. So these things have been bred based on their DNA and the characteristics that you want, okay, in your fruit that you're going to eat. And then the rootstock has been studied for the disease and insect resistance, drought tolerance, and things like that. So it's kind of gets to be pretty difficult. I mean, it's real easy to graft trees. I mean, I've taken a couple classes. I have not just really had the opportunity to graft them. My grafts never made it home. It seemed like we always had these workshops in Knoxville, and my little grafted plants never made it home in one piece. So, but you can study up on that, and you could try to graft your fruit trees. They have to be in the same family. Okay. Like you can put a peach and a plum on the same plant. You can take a stem off a plum and graft it onto a peach because they're in the same family. Okay. And they should take and work. Have you heard of the fruit cocktail trees? Okay. Yeah, they normally don't last that long. Maybe one season you're going to get the different fruit on it, but generally the grafts don't take and they end up breaking off, and then you just go back to whatever, whatever the main fruit was to begin with.
Do we have any local nurseries that we get to field trips on?
Well, I'll have to think about that because most of our nurseries are buying stock from northern states. McMinnville would be one of the best places to go if you really wanted to see fruit tree nursery stock. And then we do have some apple farms, and I've got a lady that's putting in apples and peaches, and she will be ready in a couple of years for us to be able to go out and tour.
I found a place in Van Linger called Country Garden Greenhouse.
Mm-hmm.
The farm, you have the nursery.
Mhm.
He has about 130 some plants that he does for the vegetables, not so many fruit trees, but a lot of vegetables.
Yeah.
Golden Spring.
So if you're interested in finding a particular crop at this time, well, any time of the year, there's a web page called Pick Tennessee Products. I think it's picktenproducts.org, but you can just Google it, Pick Tennessee Products, and then it would bring up that page, and then it'd have East, Middle, and West Tennessee. So you pick your area, and then you pick what you're looking for. You may be looking for agritourism or apple trees, whatever. You pick that, and then you just go search, and it will tell you where those farms are close to your area. Or like if you're just traveling across Tennessee, you could travel and locate those nurseries and pop in on them. So, and it also has a guide up there, a harvesting guide, what's in season at what time of the year in Tennessee. So Pick Tennessee Products. They also have a conference, which is really good. If you're really interested in learning, the Pick Tennessee Conference is in February, and it's several fruit and vegetable production, the grape growers, the flower industry. They all come together to put on one big conference, and it's like 3 days, and it's in Nashville. Well, yeah, this year is going to be in Nashville again. It was there last year. But if you're just interested in learning, it's a good conference to go to. Yeah, we send some of our beginning farmers up there. A lot of times we have grants to send our small farmers up there. But I mean, I think it's only $125 registration, and if you don't want to stay in the hotel, you can always just drive back and forth. But good learning opportunity.
I got to see the grafting of somebody that does it.
Oh,
And
okay.
it's like they buy the seed from one place and then they graft two into it. And
Mhm.
it's really interesting to see it live.
Yeah, yeah. Now, if you had a greenhouse, you could grow avocados, you could grow some citrus, but they have to be protected during our winter months, and then when you bring them in, you get mealy bugs. It's kind of a chore. You can do it, but it's not as easy as, like down in Florida where you can grow just about anything all year round. We just can't do that in Tennessee unless you're utilizing a greenhouse or a high tunnel or something like that to protect your plants. So. Okay. All right. We talked about the reputable nurseries, and I'm going to put those up online for you. Make sure that you are getting healthy plants and that are of the correct variety. Now, Stephen talked to us last week about the scientific names, the nomenclature. Okay, make sure that you know the scientific name of the variety that you want, or you may get something that you don't want. Okay, it may not be the best plant. So knowing those scientific names, knowing that variety, doing your research ahead of time is going to be helpful. If you have bare root plants, the fall planting, like in October, November, you have a risk of plant injury due to severe winter cold, which, our fluctuations in temperatures kill a lot of our plants. We've seen that, the ups and downs, the colds and the heat, and the colds and the heat, and going from 50 degrees to 0, things like that. And so we just have a very challenged environment here in Tennessee. Um, so let's see, planting about a month or longer prior to the time that growth would start. So late winter, early spring is going to be the best time to plant those bare root plants. If you do have containerized plants or you've gotten bare root plants, which are a little bit bigger, you're still going to want to do a lot of pruning before you put them in. But a bare root, a container or a ball and burlap plant can be planted in the fall. Okay, you need to get them out October, November. Make sure you got a water system in place. Sometimes October can be one of our driest months. Other times that's when the rain and the cool weather moves in. So it just depends on what Mother Nature is going to throw at us. It seems to be more and more unpredictable as the years go on. So planting later than late winter, early spring is going to cause some problems too, because they're not going to have a chance to put their root system down and then get through our hot summers. So, we usually get our spring rains and they're fine. And then June comes along and somebody turns off the water faucet. And so you have to plan to irrigate those plants. Okay, plant selection, the pollination, and proper planting is what we're going to go over next. Pollination is required for your various fruit plants. It's required for all of our plants. It's just how it occurs is important. And so a pollinizer is a plant that is going to be in bloom at the same time as your desired plant. And so that the bees can take the pollen over to the female plant, and then you get the germination, and then you get the fruit and flower, or flower and then the fruit. So bees are the agents that transfer the pollen, and so we refer to them as pollinators. And so some of your pollinators, like what did you say a while ago? What did you say? The yellow apple. I just lost it. Golden Delicious. I'm sorry. Your Golden Delicious is a really good pollinator, but it is a plant that it's a tree that has a lot of disease problems. It doesn't have a lot of resistance. So some orchard growers will just keep a Golden Delicious out in the field, have it placed periodically around the field, and they won't let it get very tall or big. They will let it get flowers, but then they'll cut the top off and they'll cut off the side branches, and it's just there to pollinate. That's the only reason. They're not going to collect any fruit from that. So I know people tend to like to plant what they can find in the supermarket. I can tell you some of those ones that you find on the market shelf are going to be the hardest ones to grow and to manage. They're going to need the most sprays, and you've got to have equipment and such like that. So keep all these things in mind. So, but we do need our pollinators. Our bees, our honeybees are very important. But I think it's also important to note that, our honeybees are not native to the United States. They were not here until the Europeans came over. We had bumblebees, we had other type of bees and smaller pollinators, little insects, wasps, things like that. They're all pollinators, but they don't necessarily make honey. And so we like our honeybees so that we'll have pollination and honey. But I think I like seeing over the last couple of years, I've kind of seen a resurgence in our bumblebees. Bumblebees pollinate a lot of crops. And so I had noticed that I was seeing less of them along with the honeybees. And I'm like, oh no, we can't lose our bumblebees too. So for some reason, they've kind of seemed to have increased. I've been seeing more of them. So they are an important pollinator too. Another thing, if you're growing vegetables or fruits and you are allergic to bees or you're scared of bees, you don't want to be stung. There's a bee called the Mason orchard bee, and it is a very small bee. It's non-aggressive. I think it can sting, but it would be more like a sweat bee type thing, than like a wasp or an actual bee sting. So Mason orchard bees, they take less room. Their little hives are different. You basically you make a box, and it's got these thin, long tubes in it. And so the Mason orchard bee, the bee will go in, and she'll go all the way back to the end of this little tunnel, and she'll lay an egg, and then she'll go back and she'll get mud and stuff like that, and she'll cover that, make a separation in there, like a little room, and then she'll lay another egg, and then she'll go out and she'll get her some mud and stuff that she puts together, and she puts it in there, makes another little room, another little egg, and then eventually those will fill up, and then they come out, they grow up and they come out, and then they mate and they do the same thing over and over again. So it's pretty cool. So those, if you're working with kids, that's an interesting little project to give them to work on. But little to no pollination occurs as a result of wind movement. We need our pollinators. So, how do I read this thing? Okay, so here we see the pollination requirements, the flower structure. The more ovaries that a fruit has that needs to be pollinated, it requires more visits by a bee. Okay, so if you think of how a strawberry looks, have you ever really looked closely at a strawberry? Each of those little spots on the strawberry had to be pollinated by a bee. The same thing with blackberries and raspberries. Okay, have you ever gotten a raspberry or a blackberry that wasn't completely filled out? Maybe half of it was just kind of gone. Okay, that's probably because that part didn't get pollinated by the bee. But if you have a really full aggregate fruit, then each of those little bitty clusters, each of those pieces have been pollinated by some type of a bee or other pollinator. So nature is very interesting. So, okay, so your stone fruits, they're very early spring flowering. They have a single ovary, so they require one pollinator to come in. So a bee would go get the pollen off the male, bring it to the female part, drop it down in there. So we've got you got the style, the ovary, that's the female part. The stigma is where the pollen is. Okay. And even though this is a complete flower, it has male and female parts, it still needs that insect to go from the pollen over to the stamen or the style, and it goes all the way down that ovary down to the base, and then that's where your fruit starts to form. Okay, so that has to be pollinated in order for you to get the fruit. So we looked at all this, last week. We have the anthers, and that's where the pollen is. That's got to get to the ovary, basically. Now, a lot of people, if they're really protective, you've got a specific type of plant that you're growing, like some of the hybrids, things like that. They will actually pollinate themselves, pollinate the plants themselves using a cotton swab or a Q-tip, and then they will wrap them in a little bit of plastic with some air holes in it. And that way they know that plant does not get pollinated by any other pollen. So they'll take the pollen off of one tree, put it on another, and then put a bag around it, and then to make sure that you're, do you? Okay. Well, that's how you keep specific varieties to stay the same too. So that's one way. It's a breeding process. So hopefully, in like your stone fruits, your plums, your cherries, peaches, one visit should be adequate. One visit from a bee. If the female parts are receptive at the time and the pollen is viable, and then those varieties are compatible. So like I said, the pollinator has to be blooming at the same time that your desired plant is for them to cross pollinate. They're blooming at different times, it's not going to work.
The cherries go.
Cherries are another one that is moderate. Sour cherries grow better than the sweet ones, just because the sweet cherries tend to bloom early. So then you can kind of work with that by looking at your site, maybe planting them in an area that does stay colder and where they stay dormant a little bit longer, so they're not flowering out early, and variety selection. I mean, it can be done. It's not easy. Not easy to grow sweet cherries. So
in the fruit trees, so like the Concord nest, you have to have multiple trees that fruit.
yes.
And so the fruit trees, do you have a lot of inconsistent another one.
Right. You really need two varieties that are blooming at the same time so that they can cross pollinate. And that makes a bigger, better tasting fruit. Pretty much. Yes.
We'll point out there are triploid varieties.
Right. I wasn't going to go that far. Yeah, there are triploid varieties like your seedless watermelons and things like that. But so yeah, we could make it more complicated. Oh, okay. So that's just your single bloom. Some crops, well, this is where the cross pollination comes in mind. You just have two varieties, like I said, that are blooming at the same time. And again, the bees will take the pollen from one to the female parts of the other, and then you get your pollination. So, now we can grow, okay, apples, blueberries, cherries are moderate. There's a hardy kiwi that we can grow in Tennessee. I've heard people that had luck with them. You know, they may last a couple of years, but usually they're not a long-lived plant in Tennessee. Either our heat will get them or our cold will get them. But there is the possibility of a hardy kiwi, persimmons or like a native plant, sunflowers, caneberries, and even hemp requires cross-pollination. So two varieties. Okay, here's our aggregate fruits. Aggregate just based on the shape. These are the ones that I said that each of those little bubbles, aggregates, have to be pollinated by a bee. So if you do not get complete pollination, then your berry will have blank spots on it or it'll be odd shaped and it just won't be filled out completely. And that is due to pollination. Now, things that can interrupt pollination, rainfall. Okay, now we've had, I guess it was 2 years ago with our blueberry crop. We had a lot of rain right about the time that the blueberries were starting to put on their blooms. Well, the bees don't fly in the rain. Okay, and so they were unable to get out enough in the right time. So our blueberry crops decreased because of that lack of pollination. And now last year and well, this year, they actually did really good on the blueberry crops. I thought we would have lost them because of the damage with spring freeze. But I guess they bounced back. And so our blueberry growers, you know, had a lot of blueberries, did really good this year. Strawberry growers did better than I expected. They had some losses, you know, because most of our strawberries in this area are plasticulture strawberries, which you plant in September and then you harvest in the spring. But with those type of crops, you can put out row covers, you can put out overhead irrigation, things like that when you know that there's a hard frost coming on to protect those plants. So, but like I said, blackberries, raspberries, strawberry, each of those little aggregates have to be pollinated. And some plants are self-fertile, which means that cross-pollination is not required, but it helps to have a better quality fruit in the end. So, you know, most of them, cross-pollination is the best thing. Just general rule of thumb, you're going to want to have to cross-pollinate. Some of your raspberries, you know, they're considered self-fertile, so they're going to pollinate themselves. Basically, the bees will pollinate that. It's on a complete flower. So that's one of our native, the elicited bee on a raspberry. Okay, and then a bumblebee on the blackberry, so they're helping to pollinate. And here, I know this is hard to see. It's hard for me to see. So this would be, and you can look a little bit closer at this when I put it up on the Google Drive. But the bees tend to move down the rows. And so it's best to interplant those pollinators. So like I said, you may be planting Red Delicious apples or whatever, Liberty apples, and then you're going to have a Golden Delicious just stuck out there somewhere, you know, to where it's acting as a pollinator, and your other crops are the ones that you're going to harvest fruit off of. So I can't read the varieties from here. it's too blurry. But anyway, that's kind of, how you would lay out an orchard. I don't know if we talked about it. The dwarf and the semi-dwarf stock may need more colonies of bees. I'm not sure exactly why. But when you're purchasing your fruit trees, you're going to notice that the dwarf and the semi-dwarf ones are a little bit more expensive than a standard. A standard fruit tree is going to get 30, 35, 40 feet. And so some people will look at that and they say, well, this one's $10 cheaper per tree than a dwarf or a semi-dwarf. Well, I'm going to go ahead and buy a standard and I'll just keep it pruned. Well, then you break your leg or something like that where you can't get up and trim those trees and they go a couple of years without pruning. Woo, next thing you know is you've got 30-foot trees and you have to, bring in a lift truck or something to help you shape that tree and get it back down to a manageable size. So I'd recommend definitely get a dwarf or semi-dwarf, semi-dwarfing rootstock on your plants, semi-dwarf fruit plants. Okay. Okay, we're going to be looking at that. It depends on what the variety is, what the mature height of the tree is. And so we're going to look at spacing here in just a minute. I'm going to finish up pollinators and then let y'all have a little bit of a break and then we'll go back into that. So some of that's going to come later. It's usually 15, 30 foot, something like that. Yes. Big. Not many because they get froze back in the winter. I mean, I do know of a few people that have hardy figs, and they do really well. And they may have like a little protected microclimate where they're growing. I tried to grow them out of the farm that I had out in the Fredonia area every year. They got froze back to the ground and we were just like starting over. And then by about the time that they would start making fruit, then we got our first fall freeze and then they were gone again. So, they just, when they get knocked back to the ground every year, it takes so long for them to put growth out again. Yeah. Yeah. Yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And sometimes, I mean, I know I grew up in Missouri, which is a colder climate. And so the recommendation was that if you're growing fig trees, that what you would do is, depending on what size it was, you could take a bucket and, put some burlap around it and fill it with leaves and just wrap it up and cover it for the winter. And that would help keep the top from being killed back completely by a winter freeze. So you can protect them different ways, just depends on how much trouble you want to go through. You can also make cages to put around the trees and fill them with like leaves or straw or something like that. And then maybe use a row cover or burlap and cover those plants. So if you're wanting to grow fig trees and they keep dying on you, you may want to try some protective measures. But I know John Matthews, well, he was a teacher of biology at Austin Peay and was an awesome gardener. He had some of the best fruit trees. And he always had big old figs on his trees. But mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Yep. So it just depends on your soil and depends on your little microclimate and how much you take care of it and provide protection. Okay, so I guess to kind of summarize the pollinator part, to be effective pollinizer, the variety must have a bloom period that overlaps that of the variety to be pollinated. It must produce viable pollen and be grown in close proximity to the variety to be pollinated. So I believe the recommendation is about every 100 foot to have a pollinator in, kind of do a match, a pollinator for that specific variety. And then our insect pollinated fruits are just about all of them. Okay, we have very few that would be wind pollinated, so we need our insects for that. So there again, just the cross pollination. All right. self-fertile crops with cross-pollination. That's going to improve the size and the shape. Caneberries, or we call them brambles. That's going to be your blackberries and raspberries, things of that nature. We call brambles, or they're trying to get us away from saying brambles and call them caneberries. But if you've called them brambles for 20 years, you're still going to continue to call them brambles. But it makes sense. They're caneberries because they grow on canes like roses. No. Okay, and the best time to plan for pollination is when you order your plants. Most nurseries, and if you go to the Starks website, they will have a chart that says, okay, this is the desired plant that you want to grow. This is the pollinator that you need to buy to go with it. And then we've got some of those from Tennessee and Kentucky that I'll also put up on that Google Drive so that you'll have that. So but yeah, there'll be charts or tables with recommending those varieties. Our environmental conditions that can affect pollination, the temperatures below 55 to 60 degrees are going to reduce the bee flight and activity, as well as the windy conditions and rainy conditions. So that can affect your pollination in the spring. If we get a cool day and it's rainy, those bees are not out there working, you're not going to get the pollination that is desired. Temperatures above 85 to 90 degrees also, they dry out the flower's stigma. Okay, and so it's not open to being pollinated. It's dried up and it will not accept the pollen, and so you do not get pollination. The bloom just falls off. Okay, so that can happen when the temperatures get really high, like we've seen over the last month. A lot of plants, especially in the vegetable families, will abort their blooms. Okay, tomatoes will start aborting their blooms when it gets above 90 degrees. Peppers love hot temperatures. For some reason, they grow like crazy when it gets up to 90 degrees, and they'll flower and start forming fruit. But tomatoes don't like it. They'll just kind of start shutting down. They say, don't like it. Your vine crops, your cucumbers, squash, watermelon, things of that nature. For some reason, the hot weather tends to trigger them to put out male flowers and not so many female flowers. And so if you see you've got tons of flowers and you're not getting any fruit, take a closer look at them. Okay, if the flower is just straight attached to the stem and you don't see a swelling at the base, that's going to be a male flower. Sorry, that'll be a male flower. Now, if you look at one and you look at it and it's got that little swelling, you can see that ovary on the base of it, then that is a female flower. And so you can actually take the pollen off the male and put it on the female and pollinate if you have to. So if you're seeing, sex in the garden, there, I said it. So you can help your plants along, So, but sometimes, when it gets as hot and as dry as it has been, we got some rain over the weekend. That was good. We need more. But when temperatures get like that, you're going to see your fruit production just go down. I mean, there's just no getting around it. No matter how much you water, the air temperatures are hot, the bees are not working, the flowers are shutting down, they're just done. So, and finally, applying insecticides during that bloom time can harm bees or other pollinating insects. And we will be going over a little bit on the fruit spray guide after this and talk about when to spray to avoid your honeybees. But let's go ahead and take a break, maybe about 10 minutes. Let y'all get up and move around, use the restroom. And so we'll come back at 1:45. Oh, I forgot about those. The books and magazines are free. A former master gardener dropped them off. So if anybody wants any of the magazines or books free, please help yourself. Still hurts.
This point. Like, or it's usually for still too fast. So the detail it's like this triple
Well, that's great. No, no,
Oh, I'm
please
sorry.
offer your help. Please offer your help.
you know, like an
Expert of,
yeah, the nitrogen would concern us.
Yeah.
Because of the fire blade and the color. So we burn it.
so do you have a large portion?
Well, I live in
No, not.
but that's, yeah. So I.
Okay, yep, you
Too
know
much,
what?
too much.
Well, always feel free to share.
Yeah.
It does not offend me a bit.
Don't mind. No, you do it great.
Oh, oh, okay. But, you know. I can help you. Whatever. Oh, the DBA. I was kind of looking at terms. Oh, I'm looking at the DBA. I was you need to. No, you need to. Yeah. Even if you know the answer, no, 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 you're fine. So, how many years ago? Planet is. Very good. That's the problem. It's a certain. So you want to move it further out? Want it out of my. Yeah. If you don't. So. It's pretty big. Because, you know, I mean, if you look at the diameter, okay, when, when you're digging a tree, you have to go out for every inch of diameter, you have to come out 18 to 24 inches of the tree. And that's the fall. So it's a huge deep. Dig up this huge ball. Yeah. The next time. I think there's going to be a 40 kilos. That's, I mean, it's going to cost you a lot. Right, that's, you know, why do they plant these new southern maple American hop? 3 foot away from the corner.
Exactly.
Yeah. Contract.
We
You
didn't
know,
know
we'll
what it you know. I know it's
Well, yeah, send me some pictures, you know, kind of get back to distance, like see the house and have. That. Okay, but yeah, I mean, you probably make a pretty good, it's pretty small. In order to move it. to get- But you still get, like, November, December after you have a party. Yeah, you don't. Right now, pretty. It's probably in the fall. And we get to look at it. Okay.
The way it's-
Get her to write a brown workers. It's different. Yeah. Yeah. Dinner. Uh-huh. I mean, a lot of our are imported. They're not native. They're pretty ones. You want to do the house plants, you know, your orchids, things like that, you know. So, I mean, it's just global economy. You want that, you know, because some things we just can't grow here. So, I said some things we just can't grow here. You know, like, yeah, in a greenhouse. They're not that when we get our first, you know, and they don't hardly ever produce bananas. Very rarely, and then they'll be really big. We are, we don't have enough warm days for them to actually.
So it'll be important.
It'd be an order. Oh, okay, yeah, down, yeah, down the hall, right down here. I'm sorry. I didn't realize that. Well, you can probably go through the hallway. That's our commercial kitchen. You can go down the hallway and there's restrooms down there also. Oh, okay, that's where I thought. Is it out of? Down this hall. Down this. Put the good soap down there because it's close. That's close to your bathroom. Okay. So Well, with the cottage law that just changed, I don't think there is any regulations or restrictions on fermented foods. Yeah, they opened it up. They made it easier again. Yeah. Okay, yeah, yeah. Mhm.
Here, people that
Right.
can't respect you.
I believe so. I believe so. If you want, call up here, tomorrow or whenever you get a chance and talk to Tamara, just to double check me and make sure that I'm right. Tamara, she's our county director now, and she's also over the commercial business right now. So, but as far as I know, fermented products are okay. It's kind of like honey. It's a natural process, you know, and it also depends on who you're selling it to. Now, if you're selling it to Kroger or Walmart and they require that it's made in a commercial facility, then you would have to go by the guidelines. But like you say, yeah, yeah, it won't be a problem. Okay, all right. Well, let's get back with this, and we're going to talk about plant. So we're at the proper planting stage here. So we've done our prep, we've done our site selection, we've done our soil preparation, selected our good plants that we want to plant, put in our soil amendments, hopefully. And so proper planting. You can dig your holes or trenches and add those soil amendments well in advance of planting. Now, I don't like to recommend fertilizer in the hole with the tree, okay, especially a high nitrogen fertilizer. Now, you might want to do something that's higher in phosphorus or higher in potassium that stimulates root growth, okay, and leave out the nitrogen completely. But really, when you first plant a tree, shrub, fruit tree, whatever, you know, the first thing is water is going to be critical, just to make sure that those roots are staying wet and that they're able to dig into that parent soil, that clay soil, and become established. So they really don't need any fertilization until after the first season. Okay. And again, go by your soil test. If your soil test says that you don't need any fertilizer, then you may have really good soil. And then if your plants are growing vibrantly, they're bright green, they're healthy, they're producing good fruit, you may not need a lot of fertilizer. So that's just a lot of excess money put to waste. I mean, you're literally throwing your money into the ground and letting it run off into the groundwater. And we don't want that. We've got enough pollution going on in our groundwater. So by being good stewards, you know, we're going to follow those soil test recommendations and try not to over fertilize, especially with nitrogen, and phosphorus can cause a lot of problems in our streams and rivers. So your bare root plantings, okay, make sure I was on the right one. So immediately prior to planting your trees and vines, you need to remove them from the packages that they come in. Normally the bare roots may be wrapped up in a little bit of moss, and they may be in some newspaper or just cardboard, old bags or something. But you need to unwrap them and check the roots immediately upon delivery. If those plants are extremely dried out, okay, that means they've been, maybe they went through some hot weather in the shipping process. Maybe they sat in the post office too long and they dried out. You may want to refuse shipment, okay, especially if you're looking at 100, 200 trees starting out a commercial orchard. If they were to come in all dry and crispy, I would refuse shipment, send them back to the grower, take pictures and say, hey, you know, this is how they arrived, this is not what I wanted. And the opposite is true. If you get in your shipment and it's really wet and the roots kind of have a smell to them when you unwrap them and they're slimy, that means they've got some kind of root rot disease. Same thing, refuse shipment, send them back. Because the only thing you're doing, especially with the diseased ones, is you're incorporating a problem into your orchard, okay? And if you've already got some trees planted, you're just putting in another plant problem. You know, the other plants could get that disease and so on and so forth. So don't be afraid to refuse shipment. If you're going to a local store, a local nursery, look at the roots. If you're getting a container tree, you know, pop that bucket off, just kind of tap it lightly on the side and pull it out and check the root system. If it's really root bound, it's really tight and there's very little soil there, you probably don't want that tree, okay? Because it's never going to grow properly. It's going to tend to have a girdling root that goes around and around and around, and that will literally girdle the plant. You can, you know, if they're somewhat root bound, that is more fibrous still, and they've got a little bit of wiggle to it, a little bit of soil, you can score those. Basically, you cut them, okay? Like you would take and just cut them this way, flip it over, cut them the other way with your shovel, loosen them up a little bit, and plant them in your hole properly, okay? If I were doing an orchard and I'm doing long rows, I'm going to want to rip that row or till it and open that whole thing up and add my amendments down that strip, okay? Rather than trying to do the whole field, okay? You probably have to put out a little bit of fertilizer to get your strip in between established. You're gonna have some type of a grass, a cover crop in between the rows. But you wanna pull all the weeds, all the grass away, you know, just kind of dig you a tunnel, basically. Put your amendments in, pull the soil back, and then plant your tree. So does that make sense? Because you're doing rows, and your rows need to go north and south, just like we would with a garden, because you want the sun to come up in the east and dry off the leaves quickly. And so it gets the full gamut of the sun all day long, okay, from early morning until the night. All the trees in that orchard are going to get good sunlight. And you want an area that gets 6 or more hours of sunlight a day. If you're getting less than 6 hours of sunlight, you're going to have problems with your fruit trees, if they need that full sun to be really productive. So if you have it in a shaded area, I mean, I know some people do edible landscaping, you know, and they've got big trees, they've got shade trees. You can have some pruning done on those trees to maybe open up the canopy of those larger trees to let more sunlight in. May mean removal of some trees. You know, maybe you've got some trees that you don't really want anyway. You know, if you've got hackberry or sugarberry, something that's kind of a weak growing tree, get rid of it. Just do one final cut and that'll open up and provide more sunlight to your plants. So, but just remember, you know, check those plants. If you've ordered online, open them up, look at them. If they're not in good shape, send them back. If you're at a local nursery, don't be afraid to kind of open up the package and peek down in there and you know, just see what they look like. You want to know what you're buying, you're paying for it. So yeah, nursery owners, they don't like see me coming because I'll be taking off the wrapping and looking underneath to make sure, because you know they'll be wrapped for shipping to protect them. You know, they'll have dog food bags or whatever around them. A lot of times they use old dog food bags, and I will chop those and look inside. And you know, if I see a split or I might see insects or things like that, you know, you might as well find out before you take it home, and you got to send it back. So inspect your plants. Root systems should never be allowed to dry out because that exposure, you know, of the roots to the air can damage them. And so to protect the roots from drying out, you're going to want to put them into some water, and then you can take them back out, wrap them in newspaper, or maybe put a little bit of plastic around them and keep them in a refrigerator or another cool area until you're ready to plant. You can keep the bare root plants maybe a week, maybe 2 weeks by doing that. Otherwise, the roots are going to start to rot. They're going to start to develop some bacteria or fungal organisms. So you really want to get them planted as soon as possible. So you want to have your field prepared, ready to plant. If you have to wait, you know, because maybe it's raining or you're just not quite ready to put them out in the field, if it's going to be over 2 weeks, you may want to heel in your plants. And that would mean just getting a load of mulch or a load of compost and, you know, kind of making you a windrow of compost and then just placing those plants in the compost and keeping them damp until you are ready to plant. They can survive a little bit longer in a situation like that. But the main thing is, be ready for them when they're coming in, or be ready to store them and keep them damp, but not soggy. Okay. And yes. Yes. Yeah. Kind of loosely wrap them and, put a little bit, yeah. We like to use the newspaper sleeves, put them in when we give out our bare root trees around Arbor Day. We try to get the newspaper sleeves, the orange ones where you can stick them right down in there. And so that helps protect them and holds in that moisture, but you don't want them soggy. You just want it damp. So. Okay. And then I like to soak mine, and it is a recommendation that the day before you're ready to plant, about 24 hours before you're ready to go to field with them, you can put them in a bucket of water, let them soak up that water. Again, you can put a root stimulator, something with phosphorus and potassium in it, no nitrogen, just a root stimulator, and let those plants soak up water for 24 hours and take that bucket to the field with you. And remember to try, I know it's going to be a full sun area, but if you have any equipment, maybe you're driving a truck as you're planting, keep those plants in the shade if you can, or if you have shade of other plants, or do it maybe during an overcast time, early in the morning, early evening, not right in the middle of the day where they're going to be immediately stressed. And also make sure that you have a way to water them in. Even if the calendar says, hey, it's going to rain the next day. No, I don't trust the weatherman. I don't trust Mother Nature. I'm going to go ahead and water those plants in at the time that I'm planting. And so numerous ways that you can go about it. Like I said, it depends on if you're going commercial, if you're a homeowner. Yeah, just make sure you water those plants in the day that you plant them. Okay, and have an irrigation plan in place. Now, another important thing is I spoke earlier about the fruit trees being grafted. In this picture here, you can see this is the graft union, and you do not want to bury that graft union. Okay, that needs to be above the ground a little bit. If you bury that, the top part is very likely to die. It'll start rotting and it will break off. And then if you get branches coming up, suckers coming up from the roots, that's not going to be your desirable tree. That is the root stock, which was not like if you're talking an apple, that's not going to be your desired apple. It's probably going to be a sour, little small hard apple. It's not going to grow back into the same thing that you bought. So if you have sprouts coming up below that graft union, plant's gone. Okay, you just want to pull it up and get rid of it. And if for some reason that top part dies off, don't let it grow back from the graft. Okay. And then if you're doing just one plant, again, we don't recommend any back. You do have to have backfill, but no compost or anything in that if you're doing one plant. That's why I like to rip up a whole area, like you're doing a big planting bed, incorporate your compost, your organic matter into that area, and you're doing a whole strip. And so your soil structure is going to remain pretty much the same. If you were to put in some good soil in that clay hole, you're going to get the girdling roots. The roots are going to grow into that good soil, and they don't have a reason to push out into the parent soil. They say that, they hit that clay. They're like, no, I'll stay right here in this hole. And so then you get a weak tree that's got girdling roots going on underground. So no amendments unless you're doing a full bed preparation. Just amend or just backfill with the soil, the existing soil, break up all the lumps and clumps and things like that. I like to water mine as I go along. Okay, on bare roots, you can kind of make a cone down in the hole, spread that roots over there. put you some soil on top of that, water it, put some more soil, water it, put some soil on. So if you're really picky, but you're probably not going to be that picky if you're planting 100 trees in a day. So just do the best that you can. And again, it makes it easier if you've got a whole row that's been amended and it's ready for planted. And then you're just whipping them in as you go along. Just plant and go, plant and go. So, okay, does that make sense? Yes. Okay. There's really nothing that you can do about it now unless cross your fingers and hope. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, you can't really go back, especially if the tree has been in the ground for a couple of years. If it seems like it's doing fine, it probably is. If you do have to add some potting mix to that soil, it's better to take it and put your parent soil in a wheelbarrow and put your potting mix in there and mix it all together and then put it back in the hole. That way your aggregates are about the same size and it's mixed together with that parent soil. Okay. But if you've got pockets of good soil, that's where the roots are going to grow. That's where they're going to grow. So, yeah. So either mix it up or just don't do it. Okay. We'll have to wait and see on that experiment. Now, I have seen, now this comes as common sense to me, but you do have to remove the container or the bag or whatever from around the tree. Yeah, I know that sounds like common sense, but I don't know how many times that I've gone on home visits and I found the pot and everything and the dead tree in the ground. And it's like, you have to remove the plastic pot, you just not gonna work. They planted the whole thing. Now with ball and burlap, we'll talk about that more when we go into our woody ornamentals. It's recommended that you take at least a third of the burlap off. Okay. Now I've found trees dead that were left tightly in the burlap, all the ropes around and everything. That's another thing that will kill a tree instantly or pretty much instantly is that burlap impedes the water from getting down to the roots. And it also impedes the little feeder roots from getting out and growing. So you've got to remove that. You've got to loosen it up, but we'll talk about that more when we talk about ornamental trees. So get too off topic here. Okay, fruit tree spacing. Somebody asked about that a while ago. And it's going to depend on the type of tree that you have, how large that tree is at maturity. And that's one thing to always look at, whether it's fruit trees or ornamental trees. Make sure you know how big that tree is going to be at maturity. In 20 years, how big that tree going to be. Okay. And then there'll be, of course, we have the standard, the semi-dwarf, and the dwarf trees. And that's the dwarfing rootstock keeps the trees smaller, keeps them shorter. Okay. So the standard is going to be the largest tree size. The semi-dwarf is about a medium height, and the dwarf is the smallest size. So, like I said before, with a standard rootstock, a standard tree, it's going to grow and can get 30, 35 foot tall, depending on what its DNA is telling it to do. So a standard tree is just going to require more pruning. You can't let it get out of control with that, if it's left without pruning for a few years, it's going to have all kinds of suckers growing up, water sprouts, and just get out of control really quick. Standard trees grow to maturity about 18 to 20 foot tall. Like I said, depending on the variety, depending on your soil, they can grow a little bit bigger, a little bit smaller. Standard peach, we don't do nectarines, but they can grow to 12 to 15 foot. Semi-dwarf fruit trees reach about 12 to 15 feet in height and width, with the exception of sweet cherries, which will get a little larger at 15 to 18 feet tall and wide. So your dwarf fruit trees are going to grow to be about 8 to 10 foot tall and wide. So our spacing is going to depend on the size of the canopy. Okay, so if it says it's going to get 18-foot tall and 18-foot canopy, then your spacing to make it easy would be about 20 foot. Okay, so if it says 30 foot, then you're going to want a 30-foot spacing. Okay, you want to give those trees enough room to be able to completely fill out at maturity. So if you take a bunch of trees that are meant to be 30 foot wide and you plant them 10 foot apart, what's going to happen in 10 years?
We got a great wall.
You're going to have a great wall. Yes. Okay.
Beachy.
And there are exceptions. I mean, the espalier, with the apples and some of your pears. There are high intensity orchards where they are planted very, very closely. They are pruned I can't say the word meticulously. And I mean, you have to stay on the pruning all the time. They are trellised, and so they are highly managed. That's why they call it a high intensive apple orchard, high intensity, because they are spaced very close together. So those systems, can be done. They're usually done in high production or larger commercial areas. But I know a lot of homeowners like to espalier their trees. You can make a nice little fence out of apple trees or pear trees. But again, you're going to have the trellising. You're going to have to do the pruning every year to keep them under control and keep them that specific size that you want. So that's almost a whole other subject, is how to prune those. So your standard apple trees, the recommendation is going to be about 30 to 35 foot between trees. Semi-dwarf about 15 foot, and dwarf about 10 foot. And that is on your apple trees. Peach trees should be spaced 20 foot apart, and standard pears need about 20 foot, semi-dwarf pears about 15, plums about 15, and we're not going to say apricots. So, and sweet cherries need quite a bit of room, 30 foot apart, and sour cherries you can do about 20 foot apart. So again, just look at that mature height and canopy width when you go to planting.
All right, that picture brings up a good point. If you're doing parallel rows of fruit trees in a big orchard, just keep in mind that you're gonna have to put those two rows 30 feet apart.
That's true. It's true. Yeah, the in between rows is going to be dependent upon your equipment too. That's another factor that you include with your spacing of your trees. So when you get into large orchard production like this, I mean, there are air blast sprayers. You really need a tractor, some larger equipment to get in between those trees. So that's where the pruning again becomes important, because you're going to keep it pruned. You're going to keep them tipped back to where you're not hitting them with the machinery and such. But yes, your machinery will make a difference on your spacing also. Thank you. Okay, watering.
I just noticed the trees are pretty close there.
That looked like a high intensity planting. That would be a high intensity apple planting right there. Either that, or I'm not sure where those pictures were taken. That may be in a nursery where those trees are going to be dug and sent out to be planted. They're pretty large, but these almost look like they're on a trellis system. Okay, watering is going to be critical. We all have to have water. Like I said, from about June on, we tend to go into these flash drought stages. Even though spring, the soil dries out. The water goes into the groundwater system, into the creeks and the streams and all that. So it's not held in the top few inches of the soil. And so you want to make sure that you are watering, and you want to soak the trees. You want to get the ground wetted about 6 to 8 inches, because that's where the root system is growing. Might be a little bit deeper as the plants grow, but most of your feeder roots are within that top 6 to 8 inches of the soil. So you want to make sure that you're soaking the ground 6 to 8 inches down. And so drip irrigation is good. You can use the weed barrier fabric and the irrigation line, just lay that out before you plant. And then you would just cut your holes in your weed barrier fabric and plant your tree in there. And it's got the water, that goes underneath the plastic, or not plastic, the weed barrier fabric. So again, that is going to be kind of temporary. That might be a good idea to start out the trees, but that type of system is not going to last forever, because that weed barrier fabric is going to degrade in the sunlight. You're going to have animals that get into your irrigation and stuff like that because it's underground. So it can be kind of tricky to stay up on your irrigation equipment. But with our rainfall or lack thereof during certain parts of the summer, you need to have a plan to irrigate. And if you have water nearby, you can irrigate from a pond. If you live on a creek, you can pull water from your side. If you're not sure, always contact the Corps of Engineers to see if you have the right to pull water out of the creeks. I know we need agriculture, but I'm a creek stomper. I hate to see the creeks dry up in the summer. I know where the water is going, but I know we need agriculture, but we like to play in the creek too. So it's kind of a give and take. So sometimes you may end up on well water or municipal water to water those trees, but have something planned out. And we do have irrigation specialists that if you are putting in an orchard, they can help you from the front end on designing that and seeing, what kind of pump you need and how much water, how many gallons per minute you need to have coming out and things like that. And to check and see if your pond, has enough water. Is it deep enough? How long is it going to supplement before it goes dry? So things like that. So if you're lucky to have a spring-fed creek or a spring-fed little pond close to you, you can always do a pump and water that way. Municipal water is going to be very expensive. And of course, we've got the fluoride, the chlorine, things like that the plants don't necessarily like as well. Good natural rainfall or surface water is best for the plants, but we don't always have that access. So. Okay, variety selection. Like Dave Lockwood would say, about the time that we've researched one and we released it to the public, things have changed. When you have a tree that's in a research environment, it's kind of perfect, and then you put it out in your landscape, it's different. Everything changes because it's not being taken care of intensively every day or every week. So it's just kind of a hit and miss sometimes. They do the best they can on research, and that's why we have research stations, from one end of Tennessee to the other, because we have different growing environments. You think about Memphis, in West Tennessee, it's so much hotter over in that area, and then you kind of get a moderate climate, and then it's a little bit cooler as you head up into the mountains. So the temperatures are different, the soils are different. Across our long state here, things are different. So we have different research stations set up, and they will monitor those trees and say, well, yeah, this one grew really well in West Tennessee, handled the drought. Okay, but maybe it didn't do as well as East Tennessee. Maybe the insect pressure was bad. So that's how we come up with our list that we send out. The researchers do that work. They pass it on to us, and we pass it on to you all. But you want to look for varieties that have outstanding hardiness. Okay, we are in zone 7A. If you get lower than here, we actually go into 7B and 8 as you get closer to the bottom of the state, going into Alabama and Georgia and such like that. So you're getting into a little bit warmer environment. But you want to look for hardiness, disease resistance, and your fruit quality. And as I said before, the Red Delicious and the Golden Delicious are probably not going to be something that you want to try to grow in your backyard orchard, because they are prone to so many diseases and they need that intensive management that somebody in commercial production can provide. So, and new quality, new cultivars, it could be a hit and miss. Again, we want them to provide top quality fruits. all this, that we've talked at before, your soil preparation, your fertilization, all that is going to come together after you plant, to determine how long lived your tree it is. It's going to be how healthy it is, how productive it is. So, so you might want to grow a Liberty apple, instead of a Macintosh. A Macintosh tends to get apple scab. And even Liberty, I found when I planted Liberty that I had firelight within the first year. And I had a place where apple trees had not been grown before. And, I sprayed diligently for about 3 years and then gave up on them. Oh, because they had the fire blight so bad. And then the spring freezes were getting the peaches. And so I decided it was easier to support my local farmer than to try to grow it myself. So, but I'm also, I always say I'm like the hairdresser that never has time to do their own hair. My lawn looks horrible, my grass, my landscape looks horrible. So, but also making sure that winter hardiness, that's going to be a key. You want them to withstand the winter temperatures as well as the summer. Okay. And just a little bit on strawberries. Most people do what's called a plasticulture system. How many of you've gone out to like H&S Farms or McCraw's, or there's several in the area now, and you see the plasticulture. That is an annual system. So they've pulled all those up, and right now they're preparing their soil, they're putting down their amendments and such like that, and they're getting ready to lay their plastic, and then by the end of September, they'll probably have all their crops out. September going into October. And so they're trying to beat the freeze too, because strawberry plants are very sensitive. So if those little crowns get frozen, that's on the mother plant, then it dies. You're just out the plants. There is another annual hill. Oh, well, that's the annual hill plasticulture. I'm sorry. The other way is the matted row system. And that's just kind of our old fashioned way of doing it, where grandma and grandpa probably did it years ago. And you try to keep them in the rows. You try to keep the in between the middles mowed down to where you can get in and pick and such like that. But with a strawberry plant, you have a mother plant, and that is what produces and gives you strawberries that first year. Okay, it's going to give you the big berry, and then the berries will get a little bit smaller and a little bit smaller as it continues to bear. And then once it's depleted, it sets out a runner. Okay, and that runner sets down and becomes the new mother plant, which is going to produce your big berries and your little berries next year. Okay, in a plasticulture system, there is no way for those to root down. Okay, they can't get through the plastic. So that's why those systems are pulled up and you replant every year. Okay, so it's just a little bit different way of managing. Most people, like I said, home gardens will be like a matted row system. But your big commercial, you're going to see more of the plasticulture system. And different strawberries do better in these systems. We see Chandler, Sweet Charlie, Albion. Albion is an everbearing, which means that it will bear in the spring and it will also bear in the fall. So Albion, you can actually get a couple years out of it on plasticulture. But your Chandlers and Sweet Charlie, they're prone to anthracnose and other diseases. So you don't want to try to overwinter on a plasticulture system. And it's like I talked about with the little runners and the mother plants, there's nowhere for them to set down. And that initial mother plant is pretty much depleted. Okay, it's done. It's had babies, and its baby's going to have babies. And so when the varieties for the matted row, All Star, Early Glow, Cardinal, Hanoia, TriStar, these you would mow down after they complete their flowering and fruiting. You would mow or renovate those, and then that's when you let the new runners set down, and that's going to be your productive plants for the next year. Okay, now here's the part that everybody hates. Pruning your apple trees, especially when you first get the apple trees, and that's on the next slide for some reason. But semi-dwarf apple trees are trained to a central leader system. And basically we have a central leader system and we have a vase system. The vase system is for our peach trees, which you're going to see in just a minute. So the trunk, you're just going to have that one central leader. You want it to be as straight as possible, and you want lateral branches growing off the sides, okay? And so you'll see this one here. I'd say this one's probably been growing a little while. And so you're gonna want to cut off, okay, you see that one there's two actually that are almost going straight up. Those are not going to be good bearing limbs, okay? So that'd be the first thing. Cut off anything that's growing straight up, crisscrossing, looks diseased or damaged. Basically, you want them to kind of lay like this, and so that you have them bear fruit all up and down the branch. So, so each year you're going to take out some of those limbs on the inside, so that you can keep it open for air circulation. That helps to reduce your diseases and insects. So at planting, if you get your trees in and they've got side branches on them and everything, you're going to want to cut the top. Okay. About the time that the buds begin to swell, or just right before you plant them, right after you planted them, nip the top, nip all those side branches. And then the second year, you're going to start letting some branches develop. Okay. Again, I think you only do that top cut once. Okay, this dormant pruning would be the second pruning. And then after the third year, you're developing those scaffold branches, which you want about 8 to 10 inches in between going up the tree. Okay, if you look down on it, it will kind of look like a wagon wheel. Okay, so like I said, anything that's crisscrossing, that's broken, just doesn't look right, snip it off, because you're wanting to establish those main scaffold branches that are going to be your fruiting branches. And you can even tip the ends if it's getting too big. You can tip the ends. There are ways that you can go through and reduce the fruit. I mean, if you have a really fertile tree and after you've gone through the flowering and you start noticing the fruit developing, if you've got a cluster that's got maybe five little apples together, you're going to want to knock that down to 3 or down to even 1, because if you leave 1, you're getting a bigger apple. Okay. If you leave all 5 of them on there in that little cluster, you're going to have 5 little bitty apples. So, some people will go through literally with a broomstick and or a bat, and they will knock off the excess fruit. Okay. So there's different ways you can shake them. You can hand remove them. But try to get those down to where you've just got 1 fruit on there. And so that way you get a bigger, better tasting fruit. Okay. So it's like off with your head, off with your arms, plant them in the ground. And then every year thereafter, you're going to keep pruning and pruning until you have that tree in the structure that you want it, and that it's easy to harvest, easy to manage.
You're going back to your
Yeah, you're just tipping it back, and that takes off your apical dominance. We talked about last week. That takes off the apical dominance, and it's going to encourage some scaffolding branches to come out. And then you're going to pick the strongest ones. But right at the beginning, everything comes off. Okay. Yeah, I got some pictures here in just a second. Yeah, you'll cut it right next to a node, and then you'll let that node grow up to be the leader, and then it will encourage it to branch outward. But when you first get them, you cut them everything off to a whip. Yeah. And usually I have to tell people, just turn your head. If I'm doing a demonstration or something like that. And I'm hoping, keep fingers crossed, that January, February, we're going to be able to have a field day with a new grower and show people how to prune the trees properly. Her trees are about 3 and 4 years old. And so she's about to go into production time. So she said she didn't want everybody out there with pruners, but that we could demonstrate. And so we can show how to prune and maybe, stand over you all with the pruners and let you prune her little trees. So, but it'd be a good experiment.
That was my
Oh,
favorite part. I
oh.
love pruning the trees.
I don't mind pruning the trees. Most people will be like, don't cut my tree, don't cut my tree. And I'm like, okay, turn around and look. Okay. You turn around here in a minute. Oh, look. Looky, there it is. It's still okay. So, anyway, here we go. I'm just gonna skip forward to the pictures. All right. So you're going to want to cut off that top part. As you can see, you've got a bud, you got the node in the bud right there. I think they've left a little bit too much, but if you get too close, then you're going to have a weakly attached. So I think leaving a little bit too much is better than taking off too much and getting real close. So that bud is going to continue to grow straight up and be your central leader. And I know the pictures are hard to see, but you've got the leaves around there, and then you're going to continue to remove those shoots year after year. It is important to leave some of those shoots on there so that they're going through photosynthesis and they're making sugar, they're making food for the plant. So you don't want to take off everything, that second, third year. You're not going to take off all the leaves because it needs to go through photosynthesis. So, okay, that basically says what we've talked about. You're going to want to leave that central leader. Your second season, you may have to do some branch tipping. And you always want to go back to a node, okay, or a main branch. You never want to leave a big stub. You always want to cut at an angle. I just tell people that if you forget, we want to use your rule of thumb. Okay, we want to identify what's called the branch bark collar, which it would be right around in here. And so, if you had to cut off your thumb, would you cut it back here, or would you cut it off at the thumb knuckle? Hopefully, option B. Neither one. But if you had to, which would heal quicker? Making a large wound or making a little wound right here? A little one. Okay. And you've always got your thumb with you. So rule of thumb, thumb knuckle. Okay. So remember that when you're doing your pruning. Okay. And you want to cut at an angle, leaving a node, and whichever way you want that next branch to grow. Okay. And that might make more sense when, when we do go out and see it in person. But it's very important to start this at the beginning and keep it up year after year after year. And you can see by these pictures, okay, we haven't really, the third season, they're tipping the top just a little bit to control the height. They're tipping the ends, to control the width. And they're taking out any dead, damaged, crisscrossing limbs, anything with any cankers or diseases or anything like that. You're constantly removing those and getting them out of the orchard. That's another thing is if you have a disease, especially, and you have a disease, don't leave this debris in the orchard. Rake it up, take it off, burn it, get rid of it so that you don't have those organisms in the soil that are overwintering and causing disease problems to continue. Okay, the stone fruits, like I said, it's an open leader system or a vase system. Again, nectarine, I don't even know why. I'm going to take that out of there. Peach, plum, and your tart cherry trees should be trained in this manner. Basically, you're taking out that central leader and you're making a vase shape. And then you're taking out some of these to make sure that the air can move through easily. And that helps to dry out the tree. You get the sunlight down in the middle, and then you don't have so many disease problems. Peach and plum are just prone to so many disease problems, especially the peach. You have brown rot and a lot of different fungal diseases, and just opening it up to the sunlight, opening it up to air circulation is going to reduce that, and staying on your spray schedules. So Well, your first season, you would have removed, you should have removed that central leader, but anyway, that's a second season. The third season, you're just gonna keep anything in the middle from growing. And then you may have to do some summer pinching. Again, you may have to do some removal of fruit also. If they're overbearing and they're really heavy, they've got a lot of fruit on them, you're gonna wanna knock some of that fruit off, and what you leave will be bigger, better fruit. So. Okay, so this is the open center or vase. You got your tree there, and then you're gonna take out the middle. Okay, you want to leave about 3 to 5 well-spaced scaffold branches, and then you're just going to take out that center. And that's what it looks from the top. Like I said, it's looking down, you're looking like you got a wagon wheel there. And then you just continue each year to keep it in that. I mean, it's going to grow into that vase shape. You just you keep if a leader starts to form, you nip it off again, and just keep your scaffolds spacing going. Okay, blueberries are one of our easier crops to grow. We have rabbit eye versus high bush. Tennessee, we can grow both varieties. Usually the high bush is what is chosen for our area. Rabbit eye can be not so sensitive to soil types and not so sensitive to that pH requirement. They've even started doing some research on grafting blueberry plants onto a rootstock that does not require an acidic soil. And so that would make it a lot easier on us too, if we can get those varieties growing and doing well out in a natural environment. Rabbit eye, they're going to be more heat and drought tolerant. They're going to lose less water through transpiration, and they are deeper rooted. The blueberry is a very shallow rooted plant, and so it will get drought stressed very easily. And so you need to make sure that you have water available. But the high bush are more winter hardy, less prone to frost damage. They do ripen earlier and more concentrated during the harvest season. So you may have a mix of these because they're also harvested at different times, so that you'll have a flush, of high bush, and you'll have your U-pick operation or whatever you're doing. They'll come in, they'll pick all those, and about the time that those are finished, the other varieties will be coming on. And so you get, several months of picking instead of just like 1 month or 6 weeks of picking. They might, but you're not going to see a change unless you were to take the seed from that. Right. Right. If they're blooming at the same time, again, it's going to be variety selection. Yeah, they do need cross pollination, but you're going to need something that's blooming at the same time. So if one's blooming early, it's pollinate. Okay. So some of our varieties that we do recommend, Rabbit Eye, and these haven't changed much over the years. The Bright Blue, Bluebell, Climax, Garden Blue, Tiff Blue is one of your most popular ones. They do need cross-pollination. The High Bush, Duke, Blue Crop, Berkeley, Blue Ray, Patriot. I mean, excuse me, you're going to see other varieties out there than what we recommend. There's so much research going on, so many varieties out there, but for now, these are the ones that we recommend. If you find a newer variety, I mean, do your research on it. Try to find extension-based information on that plant, not just YouTube it and have Joe Blow down the road. Look at some research information and see how those trees did year after year in certain areas. So. Not to go down to species. I mean, David Lockwood, who was our fruit specialist for 50 years could probably tell you by looking at pictures. I'm not that good. Sometimes I could tell, take pictures like the Asian pears and the different types of pears, the shapes, the colors, apples, you can kind of get close. But blueberries, it would be kind of hard. We'd have to look at the time that they bloom, the time they produce, and might be able to get close, but yeah. So it's good to keep a garden journal and keep your tags, which I'm terrible about. So do as I say, not as I do.
There is a what's it-
Mhm. Right.
Camel. I know this is kind of look, I know that the.
Yeah. Yeah, I like to use iNaturalist. There's Google Lens, there's different types of plant identifiers. But like if you're looking for that species of blueberry, that's going to be kind of hard. You're going to have somebody that's really got a background knowledge of blueberries that would be able to tell you that. So,
Usually you do a DNA test.
well, yeah. I will send it off to. Yeah, they can't. Now they can. Yeah, they can do that. I've had people question me about old apple varieties and such like that. And if you want to spend the money to get the DNA testing done, there are labs, probably like in Washington State and Maine, like where they grow more apples and things like that, that they might be able to. But again, it's just a matter of time and money. Oh.
Or
Mhm.
is it blueberries that shallow root stuff? Well, do they do pots? The 5 gallon or?
They will survive for a while in a pot, but you're gonna have to put them in the ground eventually,
Or is that?
or a raised bed. I mean, now you can build raised beds, or at least build hills for them to grow in, and they will do all right. But they're not gonna live forever in a pot. They're gonna outgrow that really quick. Because you think, I mean, the mature blueberry can get 8 foot wide, 8 foot tall, and so.
Like they can survive in these conditions about.
Yeah.
Right, to take them out and cut the roots. From the roots.
I wouldn't prune the root system if you're transplanting them into the ground. No,
If you keep them in the pots.
that's. Well, yeah. I mean, it depends on how big the pot is, I guess. If you want to keep putting it into a bigger bag or a bigger pot. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, that's true. That's true. I forgot about those. The grow bags. Grow bags. They come in all different sizes. A lot of instead of doing like balled and burlap trees, they're coming in bags. Mm-hmm. And then you can reuse them to grow vegetables and stuff in. No. You don't put I would think, yeah, that's what I'm thinking in the container. Oh, really? Okay. Yeah. And our winters really haven't been that bad except for that extreme, that one extreme that we had. Yeah. Well, that's good then. Okay, so here's kind of just an idea of a blueberry production timeline. That first year, pre-plant site selection, preparation, you're getting ready to plant, okay? You're doing your soil testing. Then you're gonna plant. The first 2 years at least, you're gonna defruit, or you're gonna take the blooms and the small fruit out, because what you want is root growth. At this point, you want that plant to establish itself in the soil and get a good root system set up. And then in the 3rd, the 4th year, then you're going to start harvesting. You're going to let it go to fruit and you're going to start harvesting. So, but with any woody crop, you want that first couple of years for it to get its roots down and get a solid base, really solid foundation. Blueberries, again, well drained. Consider raised beds if possible. If you have a poor soil like we have in Tennessee, you'll want to check your organic matter, 3% or more. And then on this, add elemental sulfur. They go over that in the soil test and will tell you, or soil test results, and they will tell you exactly how much sulfur to apply per 1,000 foot row or 100 foot row to change your pH, because you're changing that 0.1 pH unit. So it takes a bit for that to change. Okay. So you have to apply part of it, wait 3 to 6 months, soil test again, add some more if you're not in the right range. Whew. Well, I didn't mean to keep you here till 9 o'clock tonight. I thought, well, I'm teaching, I'm going to get through early. Okay, I want to look at just a few insects and diseases. I'm not going to go over all the history. Here's a few diseases of apple and pears. Where you see the powdery mildew, that is what you can see it right now. We've had a lot of powdery mildew, and we also have downy mildew. Downy mildew will not wipe off. Okay, downy mildew is kind of what you see on your cucurbits, your cucumbers, watermelon, pumpkins, things like that. And since we've got the hurricane, usually these organisms are brought up from the south. And so knowing that there's a hurricane going on down in Florida, or the commercial growers know to be spraying their crops for downy mildew and other fungi such as that, because they know it's coming. It's coming from Cuba. It's coming from Florida. It's bringing it right up through the air. And so, that's a time when a critical time to spray your crops. This up in the top right is apple scab. Okay, so that's powdery mildew. We've got apple scab. Now, cedar apple rust, y'all asked about earlier. Cedar apple rust has 2 hosts, okay? That little globby orange thing is what you find on the cedar tree. Now, right now, if you went out and looked at the cedar trees, you could find these little galls. They're like little hard brain looking things, okay? Now, when we get our first few warm spring rains, then those things are going to open up and it looks like an alien. And it'll be this big orange thing, and it sporulates, and through the air, it sends its spores, and they go onto the fruit tree, the apple tree, or it could be a quince, it could be a pear. Anyway, that's how it goes from that tree to the apple tree. And then you see these spots develop on the apple tree. And if you pull a leaf off, and if you're a plant nerd like me, you've got a little magnifying glass, you can look at those spores that are on the apple tree, and you'll see what's called a little Telia spore. It's like a little volcano, and you blow on it, and then those spores go back to the cedar tree. Okay, so it takes 2 hosts, and it's a cycle each year. So when you see the cedar tree starting to open up like this, you've got to get your fungicide sprays on your apples. Okay, that's how you kind of break the chain. There's nothing you can do to the cedar tree to keep the galls from forming. And there's nothing you can spray. You can try removing as many as possible, but I mean, look at our natural environment. We've got junipers everywhere. So we're going to have this disease. So if you're going to have apple trees, you're going to have to just learn these key times to spray. This here on the bottom corner is what we call fire blight. If you could see that whole limb, it would probably be crooked like this. And we call it a shepherd's crook. And it just literally looks like somebody blasted it with a fire. And it just turns black. There is a blossom stage, and then there is a stem stage. The only way this disease can be controlled is to spray a product called streptomycin during the bloom period. And because that is when it is spread, and it's spread by insects. And yes, it can interfere with your pollination. So it's kind of a catch-22. Do I want to control the fire blight, or do I want to interfere with the bees? So you just have to make that call. depending on how bad the disease is in your plant, in your orchard.
Variety.
Yes, some varieties are resistant, but they're not immune if the conditions are right. So if you have a susceptible host, you have the fungus, and you have the right environment, that disease will form. And we'll learn about that. That's called the disease triangle. Okay, you have to have those three components for a disease to form. The other method of control is trimming and spraying with copper sulfate. But when you trim, you've got to go all the way back. The stem will be kind of darkened color. You'll notice cankers on it. You have to cut back until you find nice green growth. Well, every time you touch that tree with your pruners, you're spreading that disease. Like I said, it's a bacteria. What you can do is keep a couple pairs of loppers or a couple pairs of pruning shears in a bucket of like 10% bleach solution. You can use Lysol spray, but it's kind of like hand sanitizer. You really got to wipe it off every now and then. You know, if you leave dirt on and you've got hand sanitizer, it doesn't really do anything to kill the germs. I mean, you just covered them up. So you will want to sanitize your equipment, wash your hands regularly in between pruning, but selecting varieties that are resistant. This is where I can throw my plug in for do not plant Bradford pears or Cleveland pears. They are just an inoculant for this disease. I mean, and besides the fact that they're a weak tree, they break, they're invasive. I could go on, but I'll save that for woody ornamentals. So, but yes, it can spread from the ornamental pears to your edible pears. Okay.
Where do you get them?
Where you get the chemicals, you can, at your garden centers, at Co-op, Real King, places like that. If I want organics, I usually have to go online. Because a lot of the stores won't carry the organic stuff. So if you're looking for something specifically organic, you probably have to go online. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. That's fine. Cool.
Not on a homeowner level. You can get streptomycin, but you'd have to buy enough to last you 100 years. So I only really see the large commercial growers using streptomycin. Nope. And I have been working with tree care companies for years now, telling them that that is a missed opportunity, is to learn how to properly prune and care for fruit trees, because there's a lot of homeowners that want this done. And, your landscape services, they won't do it, or they won't do it correctly because they don't know how. So we've even started, we have a landscape short course that we do in January, deals with commercial groundskeepers, landscapers, tree people, stuff like that. And I've tried to plug that every year. Y'all need to get into this and learn more about the fruit trees, because it's an opportunity for you to build your business. If you were to offer that service, that would be something unique. So think about that if you're thinking about going into business. So, okay. Yeah, we talked about that. I'm gonna just powdery mildew. Okay, here, and I'm gonna have to wrap it up. And I will put this also. We have a fruit spray guide, and I will put that on the Google Drive. And it's got this picture here. And when you go through this guide, it's going to go through the different crops. Like, the first few pages you need to read. It's got the basic information about chemicals and safety and such like that, and following the label directions. But you will find, okay. So you have a column here that tells you the time to spray. Okay, this is your apples, your time to spray, what to use, and any special remarks about this. So when we look at, okay, dormant, silver tip, green tip, phrases like that, it's terminology you need to be familiar with. And you can always print out this picture and take it to the orchard with you so that you become knowledgeable. Pretty soon you'll learn what all this is. And so when it says delayed dormant, that's when the buds are swelling. So that would kind of be around number 1. Your dormant sprays would be like a dormant oil. It's a horticulture oil that's mixed at a thicker level. It's dormant oil. So horticulture oils are sprayed during the warmer seasons. It's a lighter oil, dormant, thicker during the dormant season. And then it will say like at bud break, it'd be about 2 or 3. You can see where the buds are starting to break through. Okay, that's when you put on your fungicide. And those next couple sprays, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Okay, you're only spraying fungicides at that point. Then as the petals fall and that fruit starts to set, then you add in an insecticide, and that goes after the little wasp that lays the egg, that lays the worm, that gets into the middle of your apple. Okay, and the reason you wait until at fruit set or petal fall is so that you do not interfere with your pollinators. Okay, but your Captan, your fungicide sprays are very important. Your dormant sprays in those first 4 to 5 sprays with just fungicide are very important. And it's not like it's going to go from 1 to 2, in 7 to 14 days. Okay, it depends on the weather. It may go from 1 to 3 in just a couple days if it's really warm. And so you're going to spray that day, you're going to spray on the 3rd day, you're going to spray on the 7th day. You're going to spray whenever the plant is at this stage. Okay, so then after your petals fall or the fruit sets, then you go into what we call cover sprays. And then at that point, you can use one of these multi-fruit spray mixes that's got a fungicide, a miticide, insecticide all in it together. And then you're just doing cover sprays, and you are going every 7 to 14 days. So those first sprays are really critical. Like I said, this goes through each crop. It goes apples, grapes, blueberries, several of them in there. So I guess that was just the most important thing that I wanted to go over. Rust, like your cedar apple rust, you can literally rub that off. Okay, so if it's got a pustule on it and you just take your finger and you rub it and it comes off, it's a rust. And even our grasses and wheat and things like that get rust on it. This is something that's specific to the apple trees, or it's specific to quince. We have apple quince or cedar quince disease too, a rust. And there's your cedar again. Like I said, when we get those warm rains, those galls will start to open up and they look really funky and they're sending out their spores. But that would be the time to spray. And then that's just the beginning of the disease on your apple. And it will just continue to progress if you don't spray with the fungicide. So there's your at fruit set. And then, like I said, we just kind of went over this, the managing cedar apple rust. You're going to spray at these specific times. And then there's your images again. Fire blight, this is what it would look like on a large tree. Just literally looks like it's been blasted with fire. Very hard to cure. You can control it, but to a certain point. But there's so many, like I said, the ornamental pears and things like that have the disease that are not being treated, and that's how the disease spreads into the orchard. So, but there's a lot of hosts of fire blight, plants in the rosacea family, Bradford pear, crabapple. Of course, we don't have almond here, but I guess they have that problem in California. Plum, cherry, hawthorn, serviceberry, photinia, flowering quince, cotoneaster, pyracantha, rose, spirea. I used to get made fun of because when I was in school, I called that a cotton aster. And somebody was like, one of my teachers was like, what? This is a cotton aster. No, cotton Easter. There's fire blight again. Some closer up pictures. Again, this can be pruned out, but you have to prune down at least 8 to 10 inches below where you see damage. So you would be taking off that whole branch back to the main trunk. Disinfect your pruning shears in between. But as it progresses, this is what happens.
Chainsaw.
Death chainsaw. Yep. So but you can see the cankers on the branches when you cut. You know, you'll see that brown. Like I said, if you're pruning, you'll have to get beyond where you see that brown streaking. And sometimes it's just not feasible. You end up, you know, if you're taking off 50% of the tree, it's gonna probably go into demise anyway. And like I said, the fire blight is dealt with during the bloom period with streptomycin, or throughout the season, you can use a copper sulfate and lime and pruning. And again, I don't know why. And then we have some insects, and I'm not going to go over that. Okay. Yep, we have a lot of borers. We'll probably cover this a little bit later. I may go back to it when we have more time, but it is 9 o'clock. So gonna go ahead and quit there. This will be up on the site where you guys can go back and read over. I'll have the fruits other information out there for you. Next week, Ethan assured me that he would have his break sick. He would be here to teach soil. So soil basics next week. Leave your name tag here. Leave name tag here. Friends, no, I'm good. I'm good.
My daughter's backyard. In Florida, I was
Thanks, Carla. Bye.
Thank you all. Sorry, I
That's
forgot
okay.
about him.
Yeah. It would die when it got hot. Winter ride, it would die. It would spread. Yeah. But it contained the years. So what I'm wondering is, can I put down seed and straw and a cover crop that then I'm just gonna mow next year?
Well, your cover crop, I mean,
I don't really need the fertilizer, quite honestly. Like, that's kind of what I was thinking. Was that if I seeded all of these.
hold on just a second. I'm sorry. I just need to get this thing to.
Yeah, that's how my yard is. We just moved in and got